Hello, thank you for joining us today for our Farm to School Lunch Bites webinar series. I see that everyone's pages are loading, so I'm going to pause for just a second so I know we have everybody on board. Okay, it's noon Central here, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Chelsea Simpson. I'm with the National Farm to School Network. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Evaluating Your Farm to School Program, Best Practices and Tools. Our Lunch Bites webinar series is held at noon Central Time on the second Tuesday of every month. Our series is designed to be short but loaded with information related to farm to school topics. Each webinar in our series will feature a 20-minute presentation followed by a short Q&A session. Feel free to ask questions as you think of them during today's webinar by typing them into the chat window on your webinar control panel. Questions will be answered after the presenters are done. If you have suggestions for topics or speakers you'd like to see this webinar series cover in the future, please send an email to Chelsea Simpson at chelsea@farmtoschool.org, and that email will be given again at the end of the webinar. We have three excellent presenters today. Phyllis Fleming is the Director of the Evaluation Corps at the UNC Center for Health Promotion and Disease Prevention, HPDP. She holds a doctorate in rural sociology and a master's degree in nutrition from the Pennsylvania State University. She's held faculty appointments at the University of Minnesota, the University of South Florida, and the University of Maryland, Europe. Amy Paxton is our second presenter today. She has served as the project manager for the Multi-State Farm to School Evaluation, and she currently works as a consultant for the National Farm to School Network and the Appalachian Sustainability Agricultural Project on various farm to school projects. She also manages a nutrition research study in rural Honduras and continues to work for the Health Promotion and Disease Prevention Center at UNC as a social research associate to translate and disseminate farm to school based information. Go ahead and, there we go, there's our panelist slide. Anupama Joshi is the director of the National Farm to School Network. She is a recognized leader in the field of farm to school research and evaluation, including school gardens, local food systems, and she is a longtime food justice advocate, having recently co-authored a book on the topic of food justice. And I'm going to lend the floor now to Phyllis Fleming, our first presenter. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you. We're so happy that you're here today with us to talk about the results of our evaluation of the farm to school projects that we've taken a look at. And the goals for this evaluation were to identify impacts and examine those impacts, particularly on four populations. One population, of course, is school children. Another population was school food service operations and staff, and then school decision makers, and of course farmers. We evaluated projects in 4 sites, and you'll see the sites are from around the country. And you'll hear as we go along that the programs in each of the sites was actually quite different. This was deliberate. We wanted to get a good representation. We know that farm to school programs can be implemented in a lot of different ways, and we wanted the sites that were selected to reflect many of the different ways in which they could be, in which farm to school could be implemented. And so you'll see there's quite a variety, ranging from salad bars to the initiation of a farm to school program to an almost strictly educational program, to a kind of retrospective grassroots look at farm to school. Some of our findings will be site-specific, and some will be across all sites. One of the things we want to point out is that depending upon where the impetus for the farm to school program comes from, the programs can actually look quite different. The impetus can come from school food service directors who serve as champions. They can come from parents in the community, which kind of a grassroots program evolves. And then they can also come from outside agencies which provide education, as was the case in Oregon, where we evaluated a program. One of the things we learned from across all sites is that there are multiple stakeholders who need to buy in. Of course, the center, the critical group to buy in is children. If children aren't eating the food, then the program will not work at all. But equally critical are school food service staff. They have to buy in, they have to adjust how they work, they have to reorganize, and sometimes they take on additional roles. Sometimes they're reluctant to do that. Farmers are also critical. Again, it might seem that farm-to-school programs are a wonderful opportunity for farmers, and they are, but farmers who have alternative markets don't necessarily see it that way. Parents are certainly a group who has to buy in. Sometimes they really like it, and they'll come to school and observe the fresh fruits and vegetables that their children are eating, and sometimes they don't like it when you begin to restrict processed foods and so forth. And school decision makers are also important. These are the school superintendent, the school board, who lend their support either lend their support or don't lend their support in various ways. In terms of site-specific findings, when we take a look at the impact on children, remember that was one of the 4 populations we said we were taking a look at. One of the things we looked at was, are children willing to try more fruits and vegetables when they have access to a salad bar? And we saw some positive changes, and the positive changes occurred in both salad bar and comparison schools. We also looked at knowledge. With an educational program, a farm-to-school educational program, do children learn? And we found, yes, they do learn. Visits to farms, what we found is when a farm-to-school program was implemented, children had far more contact with farms, far more access, had more visits. One of the interesting findings is at time 2 in Oregon, no child reported never having visited a farm. Again, impact on children. We also wanted to see if children ate more fruits and vegetables. And by the way, we'll talk more about the methods at the end. We'll tell you how we measured all these things. One of the things we learned was that when you simply put a salad bar in a school, it doesn't necessarily increase the fruit and vegetable consumption of all students. But for those students who do participate in the salad bar, it does increase their consumption, almost doubles their consumption of, well, it more than doubles their consumption of fruit and almost doubles their consumption of vegetables. In the educational program alone, there was a slight increase in fruit consumption by a half a serving. Again, site-specific, and you'll see the initials after each bullet refer to Maine. ME refers to Maine, CA, California, NY, New York, and we weren't able to collect data from School Food Service in Oregon. But one of the things that in order for farm-to-school programs to be implemented in a school, School Food Service wants to be in a partnership. They don't want to have people coming in to their place of business and telling them what to do. They want to have a partnership. They want to have input. They also want the people who are trying to implement the farm-to-school program to recognize that handling of fresh fruits and fresh vegetables can mean more work. It can mean the need for training, as you see down a little lower, need for more equipment. It can mean changes, and they want that to be recognized. School Food Service also told us they needed strong leadership, and in the case where School Food Service directors initiated the program in California and New York, they did have that strong leadership, and the staff told us they needed that and they appreciated that. Another finding that was kind of unexpected for us was that at every site where we interviewed School Food Service staff, they all had an opportunity to grow, not necessarily all in the same way, but they became change agents, encouraging children to try things they had never tried before and reinforcing them when they did. In some places they went into classrooms, in some places they started school gardens, in some places they went to professional meetings and did presentations. So when you're thinking about what do you need to get a farm-to-school program going, what the School Food Service needs is important to that. And in terms of the school food service operation, one of our findings, one of the concerns about introducing fresh produce into the schools is that it will change participation, it will decrease revenue, and it will decrease productivity. And using data from the California site, Riverside Unified School District, using the data that they collect as part of their management of school food service, we found that none of those things happened. School participation did not change, revenue did not change, and productivity did not change. Across all sites, we found that school food service and the impact of farm to school on school food service was far more complex than we ever anticipated. And by the way, when I'm saying we, it's Amy and me. This was really a partnership. I'm going through all the slides in the interest of saving time, but Amy and I did this work together. So in terms of school food service, what happens with school food service when a farm-to-school program comes in? Well, for one thing, training, as we said earlier, is needed. Training on how to handle knives, new equipment, store produce, and so forth. Opportunities to grow, as we've said before. Recognition that the workload increases. Recognition that the menu changes, hopefully for the better, and that food quality changes, again, hopefully for the better. We had school food service staff telling us that parents would come into the schools just to see what their children were eating because the children would come home and talk in such glowing terms about it. One of the things that was a surprise to us is that when wonderful food is being served, beautiful food is being served, the status of school food service staff both within the school and in the community increases, and the amount of recognition that they get increases. The status increases because people begin to compliment them on the food, to recognize that this wonderful, nutritious food is being served. Sometimes the press comes in, the media in the community, and covers stories. On occasion, national press has come in and covered stories. And all of this recognition means that it's going to the school food service staff along with everyone else. And it does contribute to much more positive job satisfaction. Among school decision makers, we found that there was very strong school board and superintendent support, and this really does help to launch a farm-to-school program. In fact, in one of our sites, the school food service budget was increased to accommodate anticipated increases in the cost of fresh food. We also found that there was limited teacher participation. Now that means there was increased teacher participation in actually going into the cafeteria and eating the food, but there wasn't a whole lot of participation by teachers in linking their lessons to fresh fruits and vegetables and farming and so forth. We also found that among decision makers there's initial skepticism when the operation, school food service operation, needs to operate in the black. Decision makers are very careful about anything that they anticipate might increase costs. What we found in California, for example, was that the school food service director, by implementing farm-to-school programs as well as other innovative programs, actually took the school food service operation out of the red and into the black. We also found in one of our sites that there was no district support for farm-to-school, and as a result, a new school food service director who supported farm-to-school was fired, and we also couldn't get much cooperation with our evaluation activities. What do farmers need to participate? And we found this across all sites. Well, all farmers are wanting to make a profit, understandably, and they need to see that school food service offers them a good, profitable market. Small farmers sometimes are leery of farm to school because they say, we're not big enough to fill these large orders. These school districts are so big, we cannot fulfill these orders. And so one of the things that happened in a couple of places is that farmers got together, either formally or informally, in order to fill the large orders. Farmers also want central delivery points. Some school food service directors want food to to be delivered to each school, and that's tremendously time-consuming and expensive for farmers, so they want a central delivery point. They want flexibility in fulfilling orders in case there's a frost, in case there's a flood or a drought or something goes wrong, and they can't fulfill the order that they had promised. So they want some flexibility. And they also appreciate working with a professional school food service director who understands the business side of it, who understands the farmers' needs, and also helps to promote the contribution that farmers make. In order for farmers to buy in, it has to be good for business. Obviously, they have to sell produce. In a couple of our sites, farmers also saw farm to school as a source of advertising. Children would come on field trips to their farms at pumpkin time and then come back with their families to buy pumpkins. In California, some of the small farmers got together and actually formed quite a large cooperative, which proceeded to do business not only with this particular school district, but with other school districts. And sometimes if they don't need the school market, they do not buy in. In New York, Saratoga Springs, they did have other more profitable markets. They had upscale farmers markets. They took some of their produce to New York City. And so they really didn't need, they admired the farm to school program, but they didn't need it because it wasn't as profitable as some of their other possibilities. The one exception was they were willing to sell, well, actually they were willing to donate produce to schools, to the school food service in the winter because they needed a site for their winter's farmers market. And the one site that became available was in a school gymnasium. So for use of the school gymnasium, they traded produce, and the school food service was able to bring fresh fruits and vegetables into their school cafeteria. We found many forms of success as we did this evaluation. We found buy-in from school district administrators. We saw professionalization of the school food service staff, big changes in school food service staff. We saw that farm-to-school programs grew beyond the districts, but were due to the districts. This was particularly true in the case of the farms program in Maine. We saw increased consumption of fruits and vegetables when there was a salad bar and students chose it. We saw community excitement and collaboration generated by the possibilities of farm to school, by the possibility of bringing healthier, more attractive, higher quality food into the school. We saw increased participation in school lunch when quality was high. We saw stable and expanded markets for produce for farmers who want it. We saw students improve knowledge and gain more experience with farms. And we saw the foresight of school food service workers who said, yes, we work harder, yes, it's more work, yes, we've learned to deal with the more work, and it's all worth it because it really benefits the kids. Among the lessons that we learned is that simply putting a salad bar into a school may not increase fruit and vegetable consumption. All of the lessons, the school gardens, the farmers coming as guest speakers, the farm tours, all of that helps, we think, to promote participation in salad bar. And when you don't put those activities and promotions along with the salad bar, you may not get the increase in consumption that you were hoping for. Another lesson was strong champions, as we saw at our New York site, may not be able to overcome farmer resistance. The school superintendent, school board members, school food service director, all were very strong champions for farm to school. And they did have some farmer participation, but it was not what they had hoped for. We also learned that farm to school programs can originate from a variety of sources. They don't have to come from the school food service director. They can come from a variety of places. We also learned that, this was in the case of Maine, that collaboration from among many stakeholders in the community may be hard to sustain over time. We also learned that school in farm to school definitely includes food service. Can't leave them out. We know that preparation of fresh fruits and vegetables increases workload. And we know that farm to school combined with other innovative programs, can put school food service in the black. Very quickly, our methods. We used 3 paper and pencil methods that we administered to children, grades 3 through 5. One was to measure their fruit and vegetable consumption, and that was a school lunch recall. One was to measure knowledge. That was a knowledge questionnaire. And one was their willingness to try new fruits and vegetables, and that was an attitude scale. All of these were administered at 2 points in time, kind of toward the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year. School food service data, these were the data that the school food service director kept for the management of his own operation. And he had great data, and he was willing to share those data with us. And then we did telephone interviews with farmers and school food service staff, school decision makers, teachers, and other community stakeholders. So we used a variety of methods to come to the understandings and the lessons that we're reporting here today. And now Anupama is going to tell you about some useful tools.
Thank you, Phyllis. So what I wanted to mention to folks was that all these tools that Phyllis and Amy worked on and worked with for the foresight evaluation has been put into a UNC National Farm to School Network Evaluation Toolkit. The link to that is on this slide. I also wanted to point out to you a couple of other resources that folks can use in terms of looking at different methods and tools for evaluating farm to school and school garden programs. In addition, for each of the 4 sites that Phyllis and Amy evaluated for the National Farm to School Network, we are going to be putting together a one-pager for each of those sites, which will go into detail some of the results that Phyllis and Amy shared with you today, and that will also be available on our website and will be sent to you as a follow-up to the webinar service. So just wanted to mention these tools to you, that they are out there. There's quite a bit out there to look at. Certainly these are not the only ones, but just some that we've managed to call out for you. Next slide, please. I also wanted to share with you a couple of things that are happening from the perspective of the National Farm to School Network that would interest you. We are in partnership with the USDA Economic Research Service and are working on creating a farm to school census survey. That will be a system for institutionalizing the collection of baseline information for farm to school. We expect that this should be sent out to schools and districts across the country sometime in 2011, in the next couple of months. And clearly we don't have thousands of census workers across the country to be collecting this information. So folks that are on this webinar are our ears and eyes on the ground. So please look out for this survey, and we hope that we'll get as many responses as possible to really get a good picture of what is happening with farm to school across the country. Next slide, please. I also wanted to mention a couple of other things that are happening from the National Farm to School Network. There's a group of researchers and practitioners that have been coming together to look at farm to school and school garden research over the last couple of years with the leadership of the National Farm to School Network. There is, it's called the Farm to School and School Garden Research Consortium. There is a social networking link site, which is the link for which is provided there, that brings together about 300 researchers and practitioners that are sharing tools, that are sharing reports, that are sharing news about any new reports or research coming out, as well as opportunities for linking up researchers and potential evaluation sites as well. So if you're not part of this link site already, or this group already, I would strongly urge you to do that. And then starting next month, the National Farm to School Network is also expecting to convene 3 subgroups of people from this Farm to School and School Garden Research Consortium to really sit down and dig deeper and identify preferred methods and tools for evaluating farm to school impacts on 3 key areas which have been identified as priority areas for farm to school, which are health and wellness, academic achievement, and economic development. So these 3 are the subgroups that we're going to be working on and bringing people together to look at preferred methods. If you'd like to participate in this subgroup, please contact Michelle Marcusine-Ratcliffe. Her email address is given here as well, and more information on this will be available on the consortium link site as well as on the Farm to School website. Thank you. Back to you, Chelsea.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation, and we will now be taking questions. If you have a question, you can type it into the questions area on your webinar panel, and I will read those and moderate our question panel. You can ask a question to all three of our panelists or to someone in particular. And I do have some questions here. Our first question is, did you find it difficult to administer paper questionnaires to children? How did you convince the schools to take part?
Amy, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. It's a great question, and we definitely had some difficulties in administering paper questionnaires in schools. Just to be completely honest and up front, Phyllis and I were not the ones who were actually administering them. Since we're located in North Carolina and all of our sites are in different states, we were able to garner the help of various stakeholders that were involved in evaluation to help administer them. And we just administered those paper tools in Oregon and in California. And in California, the school food service staff members were the ones who actually administered the surveys for us. And that school district happens to have a very good relationship with their school food service program, and were willing to allow us to take up some of the lunchtime and then also some of the class time after lunch to be able to administer those tools. So that was actually a very easy process, and I would say that a lot of that had to do with the really positive relationships that the school food service had with the staff administration, and the staff administration wanting to know how the salad bar program was really impacting the kids. They were just, I think, as invested in it as the school food service was and we were. In Oregon, it was a little bit of a difficult situation because I think, as probably more the case in most school districts, the schools were very protective of their time, of the students' time in the classroom time. So we were not allowed to use any classroom time, and so we had to try to fit those surveys in sort of at the end of the lunch hour, or the farm to school coordinator would distribute some of those surveys during the farm to school activity time, which is really hard because we didn't want to take up any of that time to do some of these surveys, but those were our only two options. And I mean, the biggest difficulty really with the surveys was the time allotment. Not only did it take time to take surveys, but we had to take up some sort of time during the school day in order to take the surveys. But I think the key was having positive relationships to be able to do that, and to having help and support to be able to do those surveys too.
We also found that particularly for third graders, when we were collecting data at the beginning of the school year, some of the third graders really weren't reading all that well. And they actually improved by the time the end of the school year came around. So it might be helpful if you're ever thinking about administering paper and pencil questionnaires to children to have someone who can read the questionnaires to the children in small groups and who can help them complete them.
And I should say that we also, in Oregon, we have to give credit to, there was a student at the University of Oregon who was sort of our main coordinator for the administration of the surveys, and she was able to get school credit for this course that she was taking to help us with that, and a bunch of the students from that course were also able to help administer the surveys. So we were able to use volunteers from the local university to help with that too.
Excellent. We have a lot of great questions here. The next one is, what do the panelists think is the most important bit of before data to collect? What should be in place from the beginning?
Ooh.
Well, I think we probably all have our opinions on that. I think if school food service management data are available and if they're being collected in a fairly consistent, coherent, organized way, I think that can be wonderful data because it gives you participation data. You can track what happens to participation. You know, sometimes there are impressions, like our school food service interviews indicated, oh, we think there's participation increased, but the school food service management data really helps you to do that. I mean, to know. The productivity, if you have a way of measuring productivity, and in our data it was meals per labor hour, that's a wonderful bit of data too, and it has to be collected over time because there's such a concern that when fresh fruits and vegetables come into school cafeterias that it just slows down productivity and so forth. So I really like the idea of taking a look to see what school food service data are available.
I also, just to add to that, I think it really depends on what the focus of your program is that you're evaluating. For example, in Oregon, the focus was really on education. There wasn't a lot happening in the cafeterias for a variety of reasons. And so to look at changes in consumption or changes in the cafeteria would not be the most appropriate versus, looking at changes in knowledge or attitudes or other aspects that are related to the activities of the program. If it's all education, that's probably the top priority versus if the changes in the cafeteria food are what is the main priority or the goal of the program, then you do want to look at those kind of data. If the main goal has to do with farmers, then you probably want to get records from farmers and doing interviews with farmers, but also getting financial and produce records from farmers if possible. So I think,
having said that, it's hard.
It is.
It's hard to get those records from farmers.
It is. But I think it really, farm-to-school programs differ in every community and every school district, and so it really depends on what the focus and the primary objective is of that farm-to-school program in terms of where to focus your energies on what to evaluate.
Great, thank you. Here's a fairly short question. Are there structured interviews available for interviewing various stakeholders?
Yes, those will be in the toolkit.
Excellent.
And actually, if I can add something to that, Chelsea. So there are interview guides for each of the various stakeholder groups that we interviewed. And I think both Phyllis and I conducted some of those interviews. I think I conducted most of them with the different stakeholders. And sometimes those questions were really helpful, and there's occasions where they're not. So just want to reiterate that it is an interview guide and not necessarily something that it can be a good starting point, a good ending point, a good middle point, but don't feel like you're restricted to those questions only, especially if they're not suiting the needs of a specific or individual interview.
Yeah, this is Anupama. I would also add that the useful tools that were provided, some of those links also have sample interview guides. And again, reiterating Amy's point that they are really guides. Each program is so different. You'll have to tweak your interview guide and your questionnaire to suit your needs anyway.
We're still taking questions, but I thought it'd be a good idea to move on to the next slide just so you would all have the information about where to find these resources on our website. And if you have further questions afterwards, by the way, there is also my email, but we do have other questions. Let's see, as farm-to-school programs are so variable, how do they begin, how are they being defined for the purposes of the farm-to-school census survey with USDA ERS?
Okay, so that is a question for me. I think we are taking a broad approach with the definition of farm-to-school programs being four different things, and the primary one being local procurement. And in addition to that, any of the above, so school gardens, educational activities, and other outside of the classroom curriculum connections inside of the classroom and then outside of the classroom as well.
Here's another question about the study. How was fruit and vegetable consumption measured? Was it using a dietary recall on the surveys?
Amy, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, great question. It was not a 24-hour dietary recall, and the reason being that using 24-hour dietary recalls with children 3rd grade to 5th grade, the results and the research on that has sort of been mixed as to how accurate they are at telling you about your the food they ate in the last 24 hours. From that research, though, we have learned that kids of that age are better at recalling one meal as opposed to 24 hours worth of meals, and they're much better at their recall is more accurate when they can report what they've eaten right after that meal. So the shorter the time interval the better and the more accurate they are. And so using those principles, we created the school lunch recall, which asks kids about one meal, the school lunch that they ate, and ideally it's administered right after lunch. And so we sort of tried our hardest to have that tool administered right after the lunch period. And we also know that from the research that kids are more accurate if we prompt them as well. And so the school lunch recall, which you have access to, is in that toolkit, and there's an example one in there that shows how we actually went through the school menu for that day. So we collected data, like for example in California, we collected 5 days worth of food consumption data at the beginning of the school year, and then we did 5 days again at the end of the school year. And each one of those days was a different recall tailored to the menu for that day. So for example, we asked if the menu was hot dogs. We asked the kids if they ate the hot dog, how much they ate of it, if they liked it, and would they choose it again. We went through each of the menu items with those sort of 4 basic questions. And the response options, especially for the amount of each item that the kids ate, have been used quite often by a researcher named Susie Baxter at the University of South Carolina. And those response options in terms of the amounts have been tested and validated quite a bit with that age group. And we also, before implementing this tool, we were able to do sort of a mini validation study with the school lunch recall with a school and of kids in North Carolina. And we were able to compare the school lunch recall with lunchroom observations. And we actually got a pretty valid response, and that kids were pretty accurate at recalling what they had eaten for lunch compared to our observations of what they ate for lunch, as well as the amounts too. And that's actually a paper that was published in the Journal of American Dietetic Association this past March, and there's a reference to that validation study and in the toolkit as well. So that's a quick summary of how we measured fruit and vegetable consumption. So we didn't really look at even though we asked about entrees, we asked about milk. Just for this purpose, we just analyzed the fruit and vegetable intake from the school lunch meals. Do you have anything to add to that, Phyllis?
No, that's good.
Our next question is, do you have any data on how sales to schools impact farmer incomes?
Well, we don't have data from the farmers. The farmers either said they didn't keep records like that or they didn't want to share them. We do have data from the school food service management data that I talked about earlier, talking about how much money, what the sales volume was for local farmers from one year to the next. And I have to say I don't have that in front of me, but I could find it if somebody wanted to contact me. But it increased considerably. In Riverside, California, what they were doing was rolling out salad bars to 4 to 6 schools every year. And we just picked up on one of the years in which they were being rolled out to 4 schools. And so the data indicate really significant, sizable increases of the dollars going to local farmers for their food. But I'd be happy to look that up. I just don't have it in front of me, the exact numbers.
I should also add that the one-pagers on each of those sites that we are preparing that you'll get as a follow-up email for this webinar will have that information as well.
And Anupama, a small follow-up to that based on one of the other questions. Someone wanted to know if there were plans to create an evaluation manual that include these best practices in a general sense.
That's a great question. I think we've sort of waited to have these evaluation tools made publicly available because we've been trying to think through how we should have these the tools that have been used made publicly available. So at this point, I think what I can say is that the tools that the UNC evaluation has used are available and will be available on the website. And as we find additional information on any tools that seem promising, we will certainly make that available on our website as well as on the School Garden, Farm to School and School Garden Consortium website as well.
Here's a question. Is there any data on the most effective methods for sustaining the farm to school program beyond the grant time frame? I assume they mean it in individual schools.
That's a great question.
Well, the grant time frame, we had the grant to evaluate the program, to evaluate programs at these various sites, but the programs keep going on even after we go away.
I would just add, this is Anupama, I would add that I think, at least for the Riverside, California one, I know that initially there was grant funding that sort of jump-started the start of the program couple of years back, even before this particular evaluation took place. But like was shared earlier on Phyllis's slides, the food service operations are sort of self-sustaining, and so there isn't really any additional money that is going into that particular program, at least as I know it, for sustaining the program. So it has sort of reached a point where it is self-sustaining through the revenue that's generated from food service.
Yeah, and this is Amy, and just to add to that, I think that's a fantastic question because we all know that grants don't go on forever, and I think what we do, we don't know about all 4 of the sites, but at least for Riverside, as Anupama was saying, they've been able to move on and continue and even expand their program without the help of grants. It was there initially to start the program, but they're quite a few years into it now, and having spoken with Rodney Taylor recently, they're actually making money as a result of the salad bars and other things that they've done as well too, and they are doing very financially well as a food service program, and I think as a result of that, they're able to keep themselves going and to keep funding the program. So at least from the school food service part of it, if you can make it financially viable without a grant, then that is certainly part of that puzzle, I think.
I think we'll take just 1 or 2 more questions here. I did want to note for everyone who's attending the webinar today, we've got a lot of questions that I think we won't get to, and some of them pertain to farm to school sort of in a more general sense, how to start programs or how to encourage programs in different ways. I'm trying to focus right now as I go through the questions on those that pertain most directly to research or to this research. But if you see my email address there on the bottom of your screen, please feel free to send me any questions that we don't get to today, and I will answer them myself or forward them to one of our panelists or someone else who can answer those directly for you. So, because we've got a lot of great questions. So the next one is, was willingness to try correlated to fruit and vegetable consumption?
No, it wasn't. In fact, we didn't find change. We didn't find change in our salad bar schools in willingness to try. And we don't know if that's a function of the instrument or if children really did not change. There's a lot of discussion of whether willingness to try new foods is affected by the environment and other situational variables, or whether it's a kind of like a personality characteristic. And so, but no, it wasn't correlated.
Well, and as Phyllis mentioned during the presentation as well, for California, that program always, whenever they implement into schools, they always have all kinds of educational pieces that go along with the salad bar, and they do all kinds of promoting, advertising. They have cooking carts that go to the classrooms. They have farm field trips, farm visits to the classroom, and we had asked them to not implement the education pieces for those schools that we were going to be evaluating, because we wanted to see what the impact was of the salad bars alone. And so that is one of our sort of next hypotheses and next steps, is to look at, well, how, if we add all those components back in, then how do attitudes change as well as consumption?
Here's another question. There has been some research that farm-to-school initiatives increase school meal participation by 3 to 16%. Based on today's presentation, it looks like school meal participation did not change among students. Is this correct?
From the California data, that is correct.
And let's see, just one more. How did you handle third grade free data, if not if good reading was not possible? Did you need to throw out some of the data, or were protocols changed to match student needs?
So I would say that the protocols were changed to meet the students' needs at the beginning of the third grade school year, and rather than have each student individually take their survey with a pencil, we actually had one of our administrators read the questions aloud, and there was usually anywhere from 2 to 3 sort of volunteers helping to administer the surveys per classroom, and so 2 of the other volunteers would be going around and helping sort of students with the questions, but the main solution was to actually read the questions out loud to the class and have them go through them together.
Right, and if you take a look at the school lunch recall instrument, it's a fairly straightforward instrument. Once students understand the 4 questions that are being asked and what the responses look like, they didn't seem to have a whole lot of problem, and no, we didn't have to throw out much data. One of the things we did is we wanted to protect the anonymity of the children, so we didn't have their names. We didn't have their full names. We devised another way to identify them, and sometimes that way to link their pretest with their post-test was not perfect. It didn't happen very often, but occasionally we weren't able to match. But no, we didn't have to throw out data because children weren't understanding.
Thank you. I think we will end the question period there. As I noted, more information pertaining to this webinar will be uploaded to our website over the next couple days, including summaries of this research as well as the toolkit that's been referenced, and hopefully all of the slides from this presentation will be uploaded as PDFs, as well as a video recording of this webinar with full audio. So just check back at our website, and also you'll be receiving an email with links to that information as well in the next couple of days. So thank you very much for attending. A huge thank you to our presenters who did an excellent job today, and I hope that you sign up for another of our Lunch Bites webinars. Thank you.